Order. Order. We now move to the next debate, and I'm going to call upon Jenny Willott. Jenny Willott.
To contaminated blood and blood products. And the first thing I want to say is just put my sincere thanks on record for Lord Archer's team and the sterling work that they did, which produced a very informed and reasoned assessment of the situation. Lord Archer himself did not apportion blame. His focus, and mine today, is the treatment of the victims of this appalling tragedy. To put it in context, 1,200 patients were infected with HIV, 4,670 with hepatitis C as a result of NHS treatment in the 1970s and 80s. And because they were unaware of their infection, many infected their husbands and wives as well. So whole families have been affected by this. So far, nearly 1,800 members of the haemophiliac community have died. And in the last few years, many of the survivors have been told that they may have VCJD, variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, again through infected blood products. Just to give one example, is a constituent of mine, Hayden Lewis, who has been infected with hepatitis B, hepatitis C and HIV. He also infected his wife with HIV before he was aware of his own status. His brothers, who are also haemophiliacs, are infected as well. Last year, Hayden was informed that he had been exposed to VCJD, and as a result of his hepatitis C, he developed liver cancer and has recently had a liver transplant as well. Hayden's health and that of his family has suffered massively over the years. He's had to give up work early, and his entire family has suffered as a result of his condition. And his family is just one of thousands across the country. And despite the large number of people affected, there has been a desperate lack of public debate on this subject. The last debate in the Commons was in 1990, and the last Westminster Hall debate was nearly 10 years ago. And the department didn't even give an oral statement when they responded to Lord Archer's report. The level of interest in today's half-hour debate, I think, demonstrates the demand for a much longer debate in Parliament. Give way.
Giving way so early. Would you agree with me that what is really extraordinary about it is that it doesn't appear that the government is willing to engage with Lord Archer, even at this stage?
That's a very valid point, and it's a point I was just about to go on to, actually. The government has always argued that a public inquiry is unjustified and unnecessary, despite this tragedy being what Lord Winston described as the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. But the Archer inquiry was the first public attempt to uncover the truth, but because it wasn't a statutory inquiry, Lord Archer couldn't compel witnesses to give evidence, and they couldn't oblige bodies to release documents either. And despite refusing to set up their own inquiry, the Department of Health even refused to send witnesses to give public evidence to the Archer inquiry.
Would the Honourable Lady agree with me that whatever the form of inquiry, what we do not want to do now is to start with more inquiries or to waste more time. What we actually need now is really direct help from the government for those most in need as a result of this terrible tragedy.
I think it's certainly true that we do need to move forward and come to some form of providing decent compensation and answering a lot of the issues. I think some of the events that have happened since the Archer report was published have meant that actually there is probably a need for some further investigation of some of the documents that have been released since, for example.
On the need for further work, would she agree with me that good as the Lord Archer's inquiry report was, it was fettered by its focus on the haemophilia community, and someone like one of my constituents who was treated for the blood disorder ITP, I won't try and say what that is in full, are being disadvantaged by that focus on just the haemophilia community?
It is true that there are a number of different groups of patients that have been affected. There's also those who've been infected with blood products as a result of blood transfusions. And I know that they, because they're a much smaller group, often feel that they're not able to get their voice heard loudly. So there are a very wide range of people that have been affected for a number of different reasons.
Would the Honourable Lady give way? I thank my Honourable friend for giving way and declare an interest, because my nephew is a haemophiliac and he has been infected with hepatitis C. And he was forced to carry on taking treatment that wasn't safe long after the government knew about the infected blood, when it was only allowed to have recombinant, which is the manufactured blood product, for under 16-year-olds. So any haemophiliac over 16 had to take infected injections or potentially infected injections. And I think it's typical of what has been a very entrenched resistance by the government to admitting what happened in the past. And now, as the Honourable Lady on the opposition bench says, moving now forward to actually deal with it in an open, frank and honest way, which will give sway to the relatives and change their futures.
Yeah, and I think there are a
Can I
number
say that interventions will need to be brief because it's a short period of time to allow the member to Minister to respond. Jenny Willott.
I think there are still questions, and a lot of the relatives, particularly of those who've died, do feel that there are questions that still need to be answered for them to be able to move on with their lives. With the inquiry itself, I do welcome the release of thousands of documents that the Department of Health has released over the last year or so, which were initially thought to be lost or destroyed. But I do have some concerns about the fact that I don't think they've played fair with the inquiry team. In response to questions in December 2008 and January 2009 that I asked, which was about a month before Lord Archer reported, the department told me that 35 documents were being withheld under the Freedom of Information Act. But they then released 27 of those documents 2 months after Lord Archer reported. And in May, the same day that the department responded to the report, 468 more documents, a huge number, were released as well, which apparently had been identified in late 2008. Now, none of these were made available to the inquiry team, and they weren't mentioned in responses to my parliamentary questions, even though the department seems to have known about them at the time that the questions were answered. So I'd be grateful if the Minister today could clarify whether Lord Archer was aware that so much relevant information had not been released when he reported, and also if she could state categorically today how many documents are still being held by the department and have not been released. However, I don't want to apportion blame today. I think it's more important to talk about the issue of compensation, particularly given that this is, as the Chairman has already said, quite a short debate. And the compensation is both for the victims that are still alive and also for widows and the families of those who have died. Lord Archer said that the financial assistance that is available currently is insufficient, and he recommended that assistance be set up on a par with the existing Irish scheme. The Irish Tribunal, which was set up 12 years ago, assesses each case on an individual basis and then sets out an initial lump sum payment and then periodic payments thereafter. And the main cost in Ireland has been the lump sum payment. Between 1997 and 2007, the Tribunal awarded €566 million to 2,666 people, which is an average of about £150,000 per person, per case. Now, a similar scheme in the UK would cost about, using the department's own figures, would cost about £50 million a year for the lump sum payments in each of the first 10 years. Now, in the scale of the Health Department budget, that is entirely affordable, and I personally think that that is the least that the victims deserve. The department's response of doubling the annual payments to those with HIV is extremely welcome, but it is the bare minimum that Lord Archer himself recommended. Just 350 of the 1,200 haemophiliacs and their spouses who were infected with HIV are still alive. So the increase in the payments to them is only £7 million a year, which, although it's very welcome, is a very small amount of money and is going to be helping a very small number of people. In contrast, the department has offered nothing at all to those with hepatitis C as a result of the Archer report. Of the 4,600 people infected with hepatitis C, around 2,500 of them are still alive today, so there's still quite a few people living with this dreadful condition. And the Skipton Fund, designed to help them, has paid out £97 million to 4,000 people since 2004, which is the equivalent of just under £5,000 per person per year. Now, to put that in context, that's considerably less than the average benefit claimant receives in a year. Now, for me, that's just not fair compensation for infecting someone with a virus that causes them huge daily suffering and ultimately is very likely to kill them. The Department of Health has said that they're going to reassess the scheme in 2014, but that is a very long way away. These are people who have life-threatening conditions, and by then even more of the people affected will have died after many years of suffering, and that, to me, is not fair.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she's already been exceptionally generous, bearing in mind the shortness of the debate, so we're all very grateful. Would the Honourable Lady not agree that essentially this is a matter of justice and responsibility, which is why an appropriate recognition by the government of their position is so very important to those who have suffered through this?
Absolutely.
Order, order. As there is a division, I will suspend for 15 minutes, which will be at 16:25. Thank you. Order, order. I'm going to call upon Jenny Willott to continue the debate, and the debate will be continuing until 16:45.
Thank you very much.
Jenny Willott.
Thank you very much, Dr. McRae. This tragedy has already produced hundreds of widows and widowers, and they do not receive any financial support after the death of their partner. It's also almost impossible for anyone with HIV or hepatitis C to get affordable life insurance. My constituent, Hayden Lewis, recently got a quote for basic life insurance cover of more than £6,000 a year as a premium, which is completely unaffordable for someone who's dependent on benefits and Macfarlane Trust payouts. Lord Archer has said that this needs to be tackled, but unfortunately the Department's response, which was that insurers do not discriminate against infected haemophiliacs and that premiums are based on risk assessment, to me is both patronising and inadequate. No one is claiming that insurers discriminate against infected haemophiliacs, and of course premiums are based on risk, but it's because the NHS infected them with life-threatening viruses that they pose such a high insurance risk and are therefore charged unaffordable insurance premiums. All the recently announced extra funding for the HIV sufferers will be swallowed up in life insurance costs, and the government is proposing nothing to help those with hepatitis C. This tragedy has affected a number of different countries around the world, yet the British government's behaviour is very different from that of other governments. I've already spoken about the Irish tribunal, and in Ireland the government decided to provide, and I quote, compensation for persons with haemophilia on compassionate grounds without legal liability on the part of the state. And despite government protestations, there is no difference between the Irish and the UK circumstances. Neither state has been found liable for the infection of haemophiliacs, but the Irish government has recognised their duty to support those whose health was ruined by treatment under the national health system. Almost every MP has a constituent that is affected, or who has one who has died from their infections, and we've seen the level of interest by the number of members of Parliament who've turned up to this debate this afternoon. I know that my honourable friends, the members for Orkney, Shetland and Torbay, who are both elsewhere today, have got constituents that they've been involved with. And Robin Cook MP, the late Robin Cook MP, in the last debate when this was discussed in the Commons in 1990, he said, "This is not a party political issue, it's an issue of conscience and of justice." EDM 963, calling for full implementation of the Archer inquiry, already has 184 members' signatures from across all parties. This issue has been going on for decades, and it's taken the lives of over 1,800 people. Now is the time to draw a line under this issue for once and for all, and I'd be grateful if the Minister could let me know this afternoon whether she would meet with me and a small delegation of cross-party members of Parliament, along with representatives of the Haemophilia Society and a couple of patients, to discuss how we can move forward finally from this and really make sure that the Archer inquiry can be put into practice.
Minister.
Thank you, Dr McRae. And first of all, could I congratulate the Honourable Lady, the Honourable Member for Cardiff Central, for securing what is indeed an important debate. And I pay tribute to the Honourable Lady and to others, including parliamentary colleagues, who work to support those who have acquired infections through their treatment with blood or blood products. Let me say once again, Dr McRae, I'm deeply sorry for what's happened and have the utmost sympathy for those whose lives have been affected by this, either directly or indirectly. Parliament has, in both the Commons and in the other place, debated this matter, and Lord Archer and his team did conduct a very thorough and valuable review, and I also put on record my thanks to Lord Archer for his report. And we can all agree these are a very tragic set of circumstances. How could it be that revolutionary new treatment for haemophilia in the early 70s, which did offer at its time so much hope, ended so much tragedy for so many, with almost 5,000 people in the UK and thousands more around the world infected with hepatitis C and HIV, resulting in so many losing their lives? Before this treatment became available, the life expectancy of someone with severe haemophilia was less than 30 years. Although at that time there were warning voices about the risk from infection, the consensus, both within the scientific and the haemophilia communities, was that risk was low and that it was a risk worth taking. Unfortunately, Dr McRae, what we know now is that consensus was wrong. The best available treatment at that time, a treatment which was intended solely to improve the length and the quality of life, instead resulted in heartbreak for so many and their families. And the risks were higher than people had thought, and the pain and grief caused can never be undone. If doctors and medical experts had known then what they know now, the tragedy could have been prevented. But the problem and the fact of it all is they did not know. Successive governments have been accused of trying to hide what was said and what was done during this period when most of these infections occurred. But this government has done more than any other to make available information about the events, the judgments and the decisions between 1970 and 1985, after which safer blood products were introduced. In line with the Freedom of Information Act, we have made publicly available over 5,500 documents. In examining all of these documents, which span decades, neither we nor Lord Archer and his team have found any evidence of a cover-up. On the question that was raised, on the question that was raised by the Honourable Lady about cooperation with Lord Archer's inquiry, perhaps I could say straight off there is nothing to hide, and of course I give way.
Susan Creamer.
Thank the Minister and apologise. I mistimed the vote for not being here for all of the debate. But can I just ask the Minister, since she is so committed to full disclosure, if there could not be a debate on this issue on the floor of the House, because there are so many lessons to be learned, as well as so many people to be convinced that this matter is being dealt with openly and fully.
Minister.
Obviously that will be a matter for the usual channels, and I'm sure the Honourable Lady will raise that perhaps at business questions. I would be very happy to reply and debate as required. And on the issue of cooperation with Lord Archer's inquiry, we do know that there is some misconception that somehow the Department didn't fully cooperate with Lord Archer's inquiry. Well, let me say this isn't true. Lord Archer asked for somebody from the Department for Health to meet with him, and officials have done so on several occasions. But Lord Archer did not invite ministers to attend or participate in his inquiry on the matter of which documents were were made available. Over 5,000 documents released in prior years were available to Lord Archer. The most recently released, it appears, did not add materially to what was already known, but I'm perfectly happy and willing to write to the Honourable Lady, setting out precisely which documents were made available to Lord Archer. Of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way. One of the issues that's troubling constituents of mine who are the parents of Colin, who tragically died aged 7, were what consultation took place with those affected between the publication of the Archer report and the government's response, and that I think is a very tangible concern that the community affected weren't talked to at that time before the government's response.
Minister?
Dr McRae, I understand, there has been consultation and discussion, and the Honourable Lady did ask me about the matter of a meeting, and of course, as always, I'm happy to do that. But the requirement upon the government was to make a government response to Lord Archer, and we have done that, and that also has been widely published. To give way to the Honourable Gentleman. Yes.
Mr. Burt?
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Minister. Can I press her a little further on relationship with the Archer inquiry? Surely, knowing the inquiry was going on, the department could have been proactive in terms of offering help and assistance, rather than relying on the fact that they didn't receive a formal invitation to take part. And they could have been more constructive and involved more documentation with the Archer inquiry had they done so.
Minister?
Perhaps I can assure honourable and right honourable members that all of the cooperation, to the best of my knowledge, has been made available. And as I have already stated, that there has been no suggestion of a cover-up from Lord Archer, and we have given full cooperation to Lord Archer. Indeed, on the matter of being proactive, we met with the inquiry team several times. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Jeremy Hunt?
I appreciate she wants to make progress. I just want to ask, in the government's response, it said it would review the situation in 2014. That seems a very, very long time away, particularly for my constituents and indeed everyone's constituents. Could the Minister explain why this date of 2014 was chosen? Because it feels very much like kicking the issue into the long grass when, for many people's financial situation, the concerns are immediate.
Well, I'm very happy to come on to that, Dr McRae, but the simple answer is it's to allow the scheme to be operational for 10 years to be able to assess it in full. But it is no intention to kick anything into the long grass. Indeed, it is not possible to kick anything into the long grass. Perhaps I could also just refer to the point raised earlier in the debate about any supposed withholding of documents. And perhaps again I can assure honourable and right honourable members no documents are being withheld on policy grounds or on commercial grounds. The department has now released all of these. Only 5 documents from the period between 1970 and 1985 are being withheld under a freedom of information exemption on the basis that they contain personal information. I understand the sense of grievance and anger and the need to find out what happened and why. I also understand very much the feeling that someone somewhere must be to blame for what happened, whether individually or collectively. And I also know that for some, that whatever action is taken, it will be too little and it will be too late. I can assure honourable members that we have demonstrated our commitment to those affected, and we've responded positively to Lord Archer's report, which I would like to come on to. We continue to work to provide ever safer blood and blood products, and we are committed to helping everyone affected through contaminated blood transfusion, giving high quality treatment, care and information to those that need it to help them look after their health. And we continue to provide financial relief for those who are infected through their treatment so many years ago. I'm happy to give way, but this will be the last time in order that I can attempt to...
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. When I conferred in the House the other day on the 23rd of June, official record 656 column, the Irish situation with the UK situation, my honourable friend said, I cannot accept this comparison with Ireland because the Irish Blood Transfusion Service was found to be at fault, and that was not the case here. But will she admit to the House today that the Irish paid out without liability and before any tribunals had met to discuss the position, and in addition, Crown immunity, of course, applied to the health services in Britain at that time?
Minister?
Well, I stand by the points that I made, and can I also say a judicial inquiry in Ireland did find failures of responsibility by the Irish Blood Transfusion Service and did conclude that wrongful acts had been committed, and as a result of that it was the government of the Republic of Ireland that did decide to make significant payments to those affected. And as I would like to come on to, Dr McRae, that was not the case with the blood transfusion service here. Lord Archer, as we know, made a number of recommendations, and we have published our response to those. And perhaps if I could just quickly go through some of the main ones. On the issue, for example, Lord Archer recommended that those infected should be issued with cards to entitle those patients to benefits not freely available under the National Health Service, including free prescriptions. Last year, we have already announced our intention to progressively phase out prescription charges in England for patients with long-term conditions. Professor Gilmore chairs an independent review which is looking at what might be done and how this can be done, and we will consider what further action is required to implement Lord Archer's recommendation following this Gilmore review. Lord Archer also recommended that the government should urgently provide funding to the Haemophilia Society. We have agreed to provide £100,000 this year and for each of the next 4 years on top of any project funding that the Society receives from the Department of Health. Lord Archer also recommended that further efforts be made to identify people who may be unaware that they have been infected through their treatment with blood products, and we agree and will provide funding for the Haemophilia Doctors Organisation to identify any such patients. Perhaps it would be helpful to turn to the recommendations where our responses have come under the closest of scrutiny, and that's particularly in the area of financial relief. In the UK, perhaps I can make clear, this isn't compensation in terms of payments, these are ex gratia payments, and it's an important distinction. Lord Archer did make recommendations in respect of the payments and did make comparisons with Ireland, as we have heard. But the position, and I do think it's important to restate this, is very different. The reason that the independent inquiry found that the transfusion service to have been at fault is because they had not followed their own official guidelines on protecting the blood supply from contamination. This is not the case in the UK. And so comparable levels of payment would not be appropriate here. I completely understand why there will always be, and there can always be, a debate on the adequacy and the fairness of payments. So far, over £45 million has been paid out through the two long-standing financial relief schemes for those affected by HIV. The Macfarlane and the Eileen Trusts were established in 1988 and 1991, and this is the first occasion on which the structure of their payments have been reviewed. As a consequence, we are increasing the payments to those infected with HIV, providing a flat rate payment of £12,800 per year tax-free. This amount is disregarded for benefits which are payable on top of this. The change removes the need for them to for people to make repeated applications for funds, and it addresses Lord Archer's recommendations that payment to those affected should not be means tested. We will also increase funding to the trusts to allow them to make higher payments to widows and dependents, although of course the level of payment will remain at the discretion of the trustees. Turning to the payments to those affected by hepatitis C, the Skipton Fund has to date paid out nearly £100 million. And in answer to the question of why 2014, perhaps I can elaborate a little further, it is my view that the fund is still relatively young. It has only been running for 5 years. And so perhaps the assurance I can give to honourable and right honourable members is the importance, I feel, of the review in 2014. On the matter of insurance, for all pre-existing conditions, insurability and the level of premium is determined through assessment of individual risk. And there has been this suggestion through Lord Archer that patients be given greater access to insurance, perhaps through payments. Our view is it's an individual's choice how to spend the payments as they see fit. But we have now published our final response to Lord Archer's recommendations, and we are seeking to implement our commitments as soon as we can. The Honourable Lady did also raise the matter of access to insurance through insurers, and I have heard the comments made, but I can say that the Association of British Insurers have assured us that insurers do not treat haemophiliacs or those infected only with HIV or hepatitis C any differently from other people with other pre-existing conditions. In practice, all people with pre-existing conditions, as we know, have to be declared and are normally subject to additional premium loading. And in some cases, it is the case that insurance is unavailable. If there are further matters in respect of insurers, I'd be very happy to raise those matters, of course, with colleague ministers to pursue that point. And that may be something that there is a discussion about when we meet. Perhaps I could just say, in drawing our position to a close, I absolutely realise, Dr McRae, that the government's response will not fully satisfy everybody. We are dealing with an extremely difficult situation that none of us would have chosen to have been in. But I hope that I have been able to set out just a few of the points, at least, to confirm the openness and the transparency of the government in its response, and that we have sought to do the best that we can in, as I say, a situation that would not have been chosen by any of us.
Order. Order. We now move to the next debate, and it's the debate for energy security and nuclear non-proliferation.